He was the capo dei capi, a man who could level cities with a single phone call. But Alessandro De Luca had one blind spot, the woman wearing his diamond ring. He thought Isabella was an angel sent to care for his ailing mother. He was wrong. Dead wrong. In the shadows of his fortress, a cruel game was being played, one that would break the code of silence. When a terrified, invisible maid finally stood between a monster and a helpless old woman, she didn't just risk her job, she risked her life. But she had no idea that the devil himself was watching from the dark, and hell was about to break loose. The rain battered the windows of the De Luca estate, a sprawling fortress of grey stone and iron gates nestled in the hills of Tuscany, far removed from the grime of the city streets where Alessandro De Luca made his fortune. They called him the Wolf, not because he was wild, but because he was precise. He hunted in silence, and he never left scraps. Alessandro adjusted the cuffs of his bespoke Brioni suit, staring at his reflection in the heavy mirror of his study. He looked tired. The dark circles under his steel-grey eyes were the only betrayal of the war he was fighting, on two fronts, the encroaching rival families from the south and the deteriorating health of his mother Donatella. "Is the merger secure?" Alessandro asked, his voice a low rumble. Standing by the door, his consigliere, darker and older, nodded. "The Montgomery family is ready to sign. The union between you and Isabella will cement the alliance. The shipping routes are yours, Alessandro." But what?" Alessandro turned his gaze sharp. "Isabella. She is demanding. The staff is on edge. 3 maids quit this week." Alessandro waved a hand dismissively. "She is a princess raised in silk. She has a temper. I don't need her to be kind. I need her last name. As long as she respects my mother, she can burn the rest of the house down for all I care." That was the condition. The only condition. Donatella De Luca, once the matriarch who commanded respect from hitmen and senators alike, was now a shadow of herself. Early-onset dementia had stolen her memories and her dignity. She was fragile, confused, and utterly dependent on care. Alessandro, guilt-ridden by his inability to cure her, had entrusted her care to his fiancée, Isabella Montgomery. Isabella was breathtaking, a vision of blonde ambition and blue-eyed innocence. To Alessandro, she played the part of the doting future daughter-in-law perfectly. She sat by Donatella's wheelchair, feeding her soup-reading poetry, and wiping her chin with delicate lace handkerchiefs whenever Alessandro was in the room. But downstairs in the servants' quarters, the reality was a cold, hard stone. Sophie Bennet scrubbed the marble floors of the foyer until her knuckles were raw. She was 23, invisible and desperate. Her father's gambling debts had left her with nothing but fear and a need for quick cash, which led her here to the lion's den. She kept her head down, her brown hair tucked into a severe bun, and her mouth shut. In the De Luca household, silence wasn't just a rule. It was a survival tactic. "You missed a spot," a voice sneered from the staircase. Sophie froze. It was Isabella. She was wearing a silk robe that cost more than Sophie's entire life earnings holding a glass of champagne at 10 in the morning. "I apologize, Miss Montgomery," Sophie whispered, dipping her head. She scrambled to wipe the pristine floor again. Isabella descended the stairs, her heels clicking like gunshots in the empty hall. She stopped right in front of Sophie, nudging Sophie's shoulder with the toe of her shoe. "You're new. What's your name?" "No, don't tell me. I don't care. Just know this: when I become the mistress of this house next month, things are going to change. No more charity cases. No more incompetence. She kicked the bucket of soapy water. It spilled across the floor Sophie had just dried. Clean it up. Isabella smiled, a cold, dead expression. And then go check on the old woman. She's been wailing for an hour. If she ruins my headache, you're fired. Sophie watched Isabella walk away, her heart pounding against her ribs. She didn't care about the water. She cared about Donatella. The old woman wasn't a nuisance to Sophie. She was a sweet, confused soul who hummed lullabies in Italian and thought Sophie was her sister from 1960. Sophie hurried to mop up the water, her hands trembling. She needed this job. But more than that, she was starting to get a sick feeling in her stomach that the woman about to marry the most dangerous man in Italy was a fraud. A dangerous, cruel fraud. 2 weeks passed. The engagement party was drawing near, and the estate was buzzing with florists, caterers, and security teams. Alessandro was rarely home, often flying to New York or London to finalize the details of the Montgomery merger. When he was home, he was exhausted, collapsing into bed or drinking whiskey in his study. He would visit his mother every evening for 10 minutes, and every evening Isabella would be there brushing Donatella's silver hair, smiling softly. She had a good day, amore. Isabella would lie, kissing Alessandro on the cheek. We sat in the garden. She loves the roses. Alessandro would look at his mother, who sat silent and vacant, and kiss her forehead. Thank you, Isabella. You are a blessing. Sophie, standing in the corner, holding a tray of tea, would have to bite her tongue until it bled. The truth was a horror show. Earlier that day, Sophie had been dusting the hallway outside Donatella's room when she heard a crash. She rushed in to find Donatella on the floor, a bowl of oatmeal overturned on the carpet. Isabella was standing over her, not helping, but scrolling through her phone. "Look what you did," Isabella had shrieked at the confused elderly woman. "You disgusting hag! That is Persian wool." Donatella was crying, softly, trembling. "Mi dispiace. I'm sorry. Alessandro." "Where is Alessandro?" "Alessandro isn't here," Isabella snapped, grabbing a napkin and throwing it at the old woman's face. "He's out making money to pay for your diapers. Stop crying." Sophie had dropped her duster and rushed forward, falling to her knees to help Donatella up. "Mrs. De Luca, it's okay. I've got you." Isabella had whirled around, her eyes narrowing. "Did I tell you to come in here? She fell Miss Montgomery," Sophie said, her voice shaking but firm. She lifted the frail woman back into her wheelchair. "She's hurt." "She's fine. She does this for attention," Isabella scoffed. She walked up to Sophie, leaning in close. The smell of expensive perfume was suffocating. "Listen to me, you little rat. You tell Alessandro anything about this, anything at all, and I will tell him you stole my diamond earrings. Who do you think he will believe, his future wife or the maid whose father is a known junkie?" Sophie went cold. Isabella knew about her father. She had done her background check. I won't say anything," Sophie whispered. "Good girl." Isabella patted Sophie's cheek, a stinging, condescending tap. "Now clean up this slop." That night, Sophie stayed late. She wasn't on the schedule, but she couldn't leave Donatella alone. She sat by the bedside reading an old Italian romance novel to the sleeping woman. "Sophie." Sophie jumped. Alessandro was standing in the doorway. He had loosened his tie, his jacket thrown over his shoulder. He looked imposing, filling the frame of the door, his presence sucking the air out of the room. "Mr. De Luca, I was just leaving," Sophie stammered, standing up quickly and smoothing her apron. "You're here late," Alessandro said, walking into the room. He looked at his mother, then at the book in Sophie's hand. You read Italian, a little, sir. My grandmother taught me. It seems to calm her down. Alessandro looked at Sophie for the first time. Really looked at her. He saw the fraying hem of her uniform, the fatigue in her eyes, but also a fierce protectiveness in her stance. Isabella tells me mother is difficult, that she throws things. Sophie's heart hammered. This was her chance. But Isabella's threat echoed in her mind. I will tell him you stole, and she needed the money for her father's rehab. If she got fired, he would die on the streets. She has bad days, sir, Sophie said carefully, but she has a good heart. She just gets confused. Alessandro nodded slowly. Isabella is patient with her. The lie tasted like ash. Miss Montgomery is very attentive when you are around, sir. Alessandro paused. He was a man who made a living reading between the lines. He heard the qualification in her sentence. When you are around. His eyes narrowed slightly. What is your name? Sophie, sir. Sophie. Go home. Get some rest. He pulled a roll of cash from his pocket, more than she made in a month, and placed it on the side table. For the overtime. Sophie stared at the money, then at him. Thank you, sir. She fled the room, her heart racing. She felt like she was walking on a tightrope over a pit of vipers. Alessandro suspected something, she could see it in his eyes. But suspicion wasn't proof. And without proof, Isabella was untouchable. Little did Sophie know the proof was coming, and it would be more violent than she could ever imagine. The night of the engagement party arrived, transforming the De Luca estate into a palace of light and shadow. Ferraris and Bentleys lined the long driveway. Senators, judges, and rival mob bosses in truce agreements filled the ballroom, sipping vintage champagne and kissing rings. It was a display of absolute power, meant to show the world that Alessandro De Luca was untouchable, and his union with the Montgomery family was inevitable. Alessandro moved through the crowd like a shark in dark water, shaking hands and accepting congratulations, his eyes constantly scanning the exits. He hated these events. They were necessary evils, a masquerade where everyone wore expensive masks to hide their true intentions. Isabella was the centerpiece of the evening. She wore a custom Versace gown that clung to her body like liquid silver diamonds dripping from her ears and throat. She was charming, witty, and radiant, playing the role of the devoted fiancée to perfection. "Where is dear Donatella?" asked Senator Sterling, a man Alessandro owned body and soul. "Oh, mother is resting upstairs," Isabella said, linking her arm through Alessandro's, her voice dripping with faux concern. Whatever lucidity she had the excitement of today proved too much. I didn't want to overwhelm her. Alessandro nodded, appreciating Isabella's discretion. "Thank you, Cara. You protect her dignity." But upstairs, dignity was in short supply. Sophie had been tasked with keeping Donatella quiet in her room during the party. The music thumped through the floorboards, making the elderly woman agitated. Donatella kept trying to get out of bed, insisting she needed to find her husband, a man dead for 20 years. Around 10 o'clock, the door to the bedroom flew open. Isabella stormed in her silver dress, shimmering angrily in the dim light. She slammed the door shut, locking it. The noise of the party was muffled, replaced by the terrifying sound of Isabella's ragged breathing. "You incompetent little idiot!" Isabella hissed at Sophie. "I told you to keep her sedated. I could hear her singing from the hallway. Do you know who is downstairs? People who can end my future with a whisper. I gave her the medicine, Miss Montgomery. It hasn't kicked in yet. Sophie pleaded, standing between Isabella and the bed. She's just confused by the noise. Isabella pushed past Sophie. She grabbed Donatella by the shoulders, shaking the frail woman violently. Shut up. Do you hear me, you senile old bat? Shut up, or I will give you something to really cry about. Donatella whimpered, her eyes wide with terror, as she looked at the beautiful monster shaking her. Aiuto. Help me. Alessandro. Alessandro isn't coming to save you. He thinks you're sleeping, Isabella snarled. In a fit of blind rage at the old woman's whimpering, Isabella raised her hand and slapped Donatella hard across the face. The sound was sickening flesh hitting frail flesh. Sophie gasped a sound of pure horror. Time seemed to stop. Donatella fell back against the pillows, stunned into silence, a bright red handprint blooming on her pale, wrinkled cheek. Isabella stared at her own hand, then glared at Sophie. The mask slipped completely. Her blue eyes were voids of pure malice. If you say a word, Isabella whispered, her voice dead calm. I will have your father killed in prison. I'll make it look like a suicide. Try me. She checked her makeup in the mirror, smoothed her dress, unlocked the door, and sauntered back out to the party, leaving a shattered old woman and a paralyzed maid in her wake. Sophie rushed to Donatella, tears streaming down her own face. She held an ice pack to the old woman's cheek, whispering apologies that weren't hers to make. Donatella just stared at the ceiling broken. Later that night, after the last guest had left, Alessandro found Sophie in the kitchen, frantically scrubbing a pot that was already clean. Her eyes were red-rimmed. Sophie, she dropped the pot spinning around. Mr. DeLuca. He stepped closer, the scent of expensive scotch and gunpowder clinging to him. He saw the terror in her eyes, a terror that seemed out of place for a simple, overworked maid. My mother's nurse said she found a bruise on her cheek tonight, said she must have fallen against the bed frame. Alessandro's voice was low, dangerous. Were you watching her? Sophie's throat closed up. Isabella's threat echoed in her ears. I will have your father killed? Yes, sir, Sophie whispered, looking at the floor. She got confused. I turned my back for a second, and she fell against the nightstand. It was my fault. I'm so sorry. Alessandro studied the top of her head. He didn't believe her. Not entirely. He knew what a fall looked like. He also knew what fear looked like. But why would this mouse of a girl lie to protect someone unless she was protecting herself from his wrath for negligence? Be more careful, Alessandro warned, turning away. If anything happens to her again, you won't just be fired. He walked away, leaving Sophie shaking. She had lied to the only man powerful enough to stop Isabella because Isabella held the ultimate leverage. Sophie felt sick with self-loathing. She was an accomplice now. 3 days before the wedding. The atmosphere in the DeLuca mansion was toxic. The staff walked on eggshells. Isabella was manic, snapping at everyone over floral arrangements and seating charts. Alessandro was distant, preoccupied with a turf war erupting in the southern docks. He had doubled the guard around the estate, sensing danger, but he was looking outside the walls, not inside. Isabella knew her time was running out. Sophie was a loose end. Every time the maid looked at her, Isabella saw judgment and fear. It was only a matter of time before the little rat grew a spine, and talked to Alessandro. Isabella needed her gone before the wedding ring was on her finger. Wednesday afternoon, the trap was sprung. Alessandro was in his study reviewing shipment manifests when Isabella burst in tears, streaming down her face, holding an empty velvet jewelry box. "Alessandro, it's gone. My grandmother's diamond tennis bracelet, the one I was going to wear as my something old." She sobbed dramatically, collapsing onto the leather sofa. "It was on my vanity this morning." Alessandro stood up, his face hardening. "Are you sure you didn't misplace it?" "I'm sure I've looked everywhere. There was only one person in my room today besides me." Isabella looked up at him, her eyes retooled with manufactured realization. The maid, Sophie. She was changing the linens. Alessandro's jaw tightened. He pressed the intercom on his desk. "Bruno, bring Sophie Bennett to my study immediately and search her quarters." 10 minutes later, Bruno, the head of security, dragged a terrified Sophie into the study. He tossed a small felt bag onto Alessandro's desk. Alessandro opened it. Inside was the diamond bracelet. "We found it taped under her mattress, boss," Bruno said flatly. Sophie looked at the bracelet, then at Alessandro, her face draining of all color. No. I swear I didn't take that. I've never seen it before." "She's setting me up. Why would my future wife set up a maid?" Alessandro asked coldly. The evidence was undeniable. He despised thieves. He despised betrayal even more. "Because she hates me. Because I know what she does to your mother." Sophie screamed, desperation finally breaking her silence. Isabella stood up, her face a mask of outrage. "How dare you, you thieving little junkie, just like your father, Alessandro. She's lying to cover her crime. She's trying to manipulate you with your mother's condition. It's sick." Alessandro looked between the two women, the weeping, beautiful fiancée and the frantic, accused Maid. His heart told him one thing, his brain and the evidence told him another. In his world, you acted on evidence. "Bruno," Alessandro said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Get her out of my sight. Hand her over to the police. Tell them to press full charges. Grand larceny." "No. Please, Mr. De Luca, you have to believe me. She hurts her. She slapped her." Sophie was crying hysterically as Bruno grabbed her arm. Isabella smirked behind Alessandro's back. It was over. The rat was gone. "Wait." The single word from Alessandro stopped Bruno at the door. Alessandro wasn't looking at them. He was looking at a small monitor on his desk, a closed-circuit feed he had installed only yesterday, unbeknownst to anyone inside his mother's room. He had done it because of the nagging doubt Sophie had planted in his mind days ago. On the screen in real time, Donatella was sitting in her wheelchair by the window. She wasn't alone. Isabella had slipped out of the study during the commotion with Bruno and Sophie. She was now on the screen, standing over Donatella. Alessandro watched his blood turning to ice as the camera picked up the audio. "You stupid old cow." Isabella's voice tinny through the speakers. "You spilled tea on my dress. Do you know how much this cost?" Donatella was cowering her hands up to protect her face. It was a practiced motion, a motion of someone used to being hit. "I should have let you fall down those stairs yesterday." Isabella spat. She grabbed a fistful of Donatella's silver hair and yanked her head back cruelly. In the study, the silence was deafening. Sophie stopped crying, staring at the monitor in shock. Bruno looked uncomfortable. Alessandro didn't move. He just watched the woman he was about to marry torture the woman who gave him life. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The accidents. The bruises, the fear in his mother's eyes that he had dismissed as dementia. It was all real. Sophie had been telling the truth, and he was about to send her to prison for it. On the screen, Isabella raised her hand to slap Donatella again. That was when Sophie moved. She didn't think. She didn't care about the police or Bruno or the consequences. She just saw the woman she had grown to love about to be hurt again. Sophie wrenched her arm free from Bruno's loosened grip. She bolted out of the study, sprinting down the hallway toward Donatella's room. "Sophie, stop!" Bruno yelled, chasing after her. Alessandro didn't shout. He just pulled the silver beretta from his shoulder holster, chambered around with a metallic clack, and followed them his face a terrifying mask of calm chaos. Sophie burst into the bedroom just as Isabella's hand was descending. "No!" Sophie screamed. She didn't stop running. She lowered her shoulder and slammed into Isabella with the force of a freight train, tackling the taller woman away from the wheelchair. They crashed to the floor in a tangle of limbs and expensive silk. It was unthinkable. A maid assaulting the future mistress of the house. Isabella shrieked in shock and rage, clawing at Sophie's face. But Sophie, fueled by months of suppressed rage and protective instinct, fought back. She wasn't fighting for herself. She was fighting for Donatella. She grabbed Isabella's wrists, pinning them to the Persian rug, screaming right into Isabella's perfect face. "Don't you ever touch her again, you evil bitch! Don't you touch her!" The door slammed open again. Alessandro stood there, gun drawn, filling the doorway with lethal intent. Bruno was right behind him. The room froze. Sophie was straddling Isabella, breathing hard, her hair wild. Isabella was beneath her bloody nose, streaming onto the rug, looking up at Alessandro with wide, terrified eyes. "Alessandro, help me," Isabella cried out, trying to sound like the victim. "She's crazy. She attacked me. Shoot her." Alessandro looked at the two women on the floor. Then he looked at his mother, who was sobbing quietly in her chair. Unhurt this time. Slowly, deliberately, Alessandro lowered the gun. He wasn't aiming at the maid. His eyes, colder than the deepest circle of hell, locked onto his fiancée. "Get off her, Sophie," Alessandro said, his voice frighteningly quiet. Sophie scrambled off Isabella, backing away against the wall, shaking violently, realizing what she had just done. She waited for Bruno to grab her for the bullet for the end, but Alessandro didn't look at Sophie. He walked over to Isabella, who was trying to sit up, wiping blood from her nose. "Alessandro, baby, look what she did," Isabella whimpered, reaching for his hand. Alessandro looked down at her like she was something disgusting stuck to the bottom of his shoe. "I saw the camera, Isabella," he said. Isabella froze. The blood drained from her face, leaving her chalk white beneath the makeup. The silence in the room was heavier than lead. She knew in that split second that the game was over. And when you lose a game with the wolf, you don't just lose points, you lose everything. The silence in the bedroom was suffocating, broken only by Donatella's soft, confused weeping. Isabella Montgomery, the heiress to a shipping empire, and the woman who thought she owned the world, sat on the Persian rug, clutching her bleeding nose. Her mascara ran down her cheeks in black streaks, ruining the illusion of perfection she had crafted for months. Alessandro stood over her, his gun hanging loosely at his side, but the danger radiating from him was far more lethal than the weapon. "Alessandro, please," Isabella choked out, her voice trembling. She tried to stand, but a sharp look from him pinned her to the floor. "You don't understand. She provokes me. I'm under so much pressure with the wedding. It was a mistake. I love you. You love my power. Alessandro corrected his voice, devoid of warmth. And you love my money. But you hate my blood. He glanced at his mother, who was now holding Sophie's hand tightly, looking at Alessandro with a flicker of recognition in her watery eyes. She is a burden, Alessandro, Isabella screamed, the facade cracking completely. Look at her. She's a vegetable. I was doing you a favor, keeping her quiet. My father is going to sign the port deal tomorrow. You need me. You need the Montgomerys. If you touch me, my father will burn your empire to the ground. Alessandro finally smiled. It was a terrifying, humorless expression. Your father, Alessandro said softly, is currently under federal indictment. My men leaked his offshore accounts to the FBI an hour ago. The deal was never going to happen, Isabella. I was just waiting for the right moment to crush his operation. But you... He leaned down, bringing his face inches from hers. You gave me a reason to make it personal. Isabella's eyes went wide. The leverage she thought she held had evaporated. She was alone in a room with a predator she had foolishly provoked. Bruno, Alessandro commanded without looking away from her. Boss, take Miss Montgomery to the cellar. Not the wine cellar. The other one. Isabella shrieked as Bruno hauled her up by her arm. No, you can't. I'm Isabella Montgomery. Get your hands off me, Alessandro. Her screams echoed down the hallway, fading as Bruno dragged her toward the heavy oak doors that led to the estate's darker depths. Isabella wouldn't die tonight. Death was too easy. She would be held as collateral, a living message to her father that the De Luca family was not to be trifled with. When the door finally closed, the room fell into a stunned silence. Alessandro holstered his gun and exhaled a breath he seemed to have been holding for years. He turned to Sophie. The maid was pressed against the wall, her chest heaving. She looked terrified. She had just assaulted a Mafia princess and witnessed the end of a political alliance. In her mind, she was next. She had seen too much. Sophie, Alessandro said, stepping toward her. Sophie flinched, closing her eyes. I'm sorry, sir. I'm sorry I hit her. I couldn't watch it. She waited for the anger. It never came. Instead, she felt a warm, rough hand gently touch her chin, tilting her head up. She opened her eyes to see Alessandro looking at her with an intensity that made her knees weak. You apologized, he said, his voice low and raspy. You just saved my mother from a monster, and you are apologizing. I caused trouble. The wedding. There will be no wedding, Alessandro said firmly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the felt bag containing the diamond bracelet, the evidence that was supposed to send her to prison. He walked over to the fireplace and tossed the bag into the flames. The velvet curled and blackened, the diamonds lost among the ash. You were framed, he stated. I know that now. And I know you have been the only person in this house protecting Donatella when I was too blind to see the truth. He looked at her hands. They were shaking. You are not a maid anymore, Sophie. You are done scrubbing floors. Sir, Sophie whispered, confusion clouding her fear. Am I fired? No. You are promoted. Alessandro turned to his mother, who was now calm, watching them. My mother trusts you. You are the only one she responds to. From this moment on, you are her personal companion. You answer only to me. You will be paid triple your salary. And you will move out of the servants' quarters into the guest suite on this floor. Sophie gaped at him. Mr. De Luca, why? I can't accept that. I just did what anyone would do. You did what no one else dared to do, Alessandro corrected. You risked your life for her. That is loyalty. And in my world, loyalty is worth more than diamonds. He turned to leave, pausing at the door. Get some rest, Sophie. Tomorrow war comes to our doorstep, and I need you sharp. The war Alessandro predicted didn't wait for sunrise. The detention of Isabella Montgomery triggered a shockwave through the criminal underworld. Her father, Silas Montgomery, didn't care about his daughter's safety. He cared about the insult. By dawn, the truce was shattered. But inside the DeLuca estate, a different kind of battle was being fought. Sophie had moved into the guest suite, a room larger than her childhood apartment. But she spent the morning in Donatella's room. A private doctor brought in by Alessandro was examining the elderly woman. Alessandro stood by the window, watching the perimeter guards patrol the grounds with assault rifles. Well? Alessandro asked, turning to the doctor. The doctor, a nervous man named Dr. Rossi, adjusted his glasses. It's as you suspected, Don Alessandro. Her blood work shows high levels of benzodiazepines and a synthetic sedative used for horses. It wasn't just dementia causing her decline. She was being chemically suppressed, poisoned slowly. Alessandro's hand gripped the windowsill so hard the wood splintered. Isabella. Likely. The doctor nodded. To keep her docile. The side effects include confusion, memory loss, and motor failure. The good news is now that we've stopped the dosage, she should regain some cognitive function. She isn't gone, Alessandro. She was just buried. Alessandro closed his eyes, a mask of pain washing over his features. The guilt was eating him alive. He had let the viper into his bed, and it had bitten the person he loved most. He felt a hand on his arm. He looked down to see Sophie. It's not your fault, she said quietly. She wasn't wearing her maid's uniform anymore. She wore a simple navy dress she had found in the closet, and she looked like a different woman, dignified, strong. I should have known, Alessandro muttered. I am the head of this family. I see everything. But I didn't see this. You saw what she wanted you to see, Sophie said. She was an actress. You're a soldier. Soldiers fight enemies they can see. Actors hide. Alessandro looked at her. Really looked at her for the second time. He realized that this girl who came from nothing had more wisdom and courage than the entire council of capos he paid millions to advise him. Thank you, Sophie, he said, his voice softening. He covered her hand with his. The contact sent a jolt of electricity through him that he hadn't felt in years, not even with Isabella. Suddenly the air was shattered by the wail of a siren. Code red. Bruno's voice crackled over the intercom. Breach at the north gate. They have an armored truck. Alessandro's demeanor shifted instantly. The vulnerable sun vanished. The wolf returned. He drew his weapon. Stay here, he ordered Sophie. Lock the door. Do not open it for anyone but me or Bruno. Get under the bed with my mother. Alessandro. Sophie grabbed his arm as he turned to leave. It was the first time she had used his first name. Be careful. He gave her a curt nod, then disappeared into the hallway. Below the estate was turning into a war zone. The Montgomery family had sent a hit squad mercenaries, paid to burn the mansion down. Gunfire erupted in the courtyard. Glass shattered as bullets raked the lower windows. Sophie locked the bedroom door and rushed to Donatella. Come on, Mrs. DeLuca, she whispered, helping the confused woman out of the chair. We have to play a game. Hide and seek. She got Donatella under the heavy oak bed frame, shielding her body with her own. Outside, the roar of automatic weapons was deafening. But Sophie realized something. The noise wasn't just coming from downstairs. It was coming from the balcony. She peeked out from under the bed. A shadow moved across the sheer curtains of the balcony door. Someone was climbing up the trellis. The mercenaries weren't just attacking the front. They were a distraction. A kill team was flanking to take out the family. Sophie's heart hammered against her ribs. Alessandro was downstairs. Bruno was downstairs. There was no one here. She scanned the room. No weapons. Just a heavy brass lamp on the nightstand and a letter opener on the desk. She made a choice. She wouldn't die hiding. "Stay here." "Shh," she whispered to Donatella. Sophie crawled out, grabbed the heavy brass lamp, and pressed herself against the wall next to the balcony door. The glass shattered inward as a man in black tactical gear kicked the door in. He stepped into the room, raising a silenced pistol, scanning for targets. He saw the empty wheelchair. He took a step forward, confused. Sophie swung the lamp with every ounce of strength she possessed. Crack! The heavy base connected with the side of the mercenary's helmet. It didn't knock him out, but it staggered him. He grunted, turning toward her, raising the gun. Sophie didn't freeze. She screamed a primal sound of adrenaline and lunged at him, stabbing the letter opener into the exposed gap of his tactical vest, right into his shoulder. The man roared in pain and backhanded her across the face. Sophie flew backward, crashing into the vanity table. Her vision swam. The metallic taste of blood filled her mouth. The mercenary recovered, panting, and leveled the gun at her. "Stupid bitch!" He tightened his finger on the trigger. Bang! The mercenary's head snapped back, red mist spraying the curtains. He crumpled to the floor. Alessandro stood in the doorway of the bedroom, his beretta smoking his chest, heaving. He had run up 3 flights of stairs when he realized the flanking maneuver. He looked at the dead man, then at Sophie, who was trying to sit up, blood trickling from her lip. He holstered his gun and crossed the room in 2 strides, falling to his knees beside her. He didn't check the threat. He knew his aim was true. He checked her. "Sophie." He gathered her into his arms. "Did he shoot you? Where are you hurt?" "I'm okay." She gasped, clutching his lapels. "Donatella, she's under the bed. Is she safe?" Alessandro stared at her in disbelief. She had taken on a hit man with a lamp and a letter opener. She was bleeding, bruised and shaking, and her first question was about his mother. "She is safe," Alessandro said, his voice thick with emotion. "Because of you." Again, he brushed the hair from her face, his thumb grazing her bruised cheek. The chaos outside was dying down. His men were repelling the attack. But in this room, something else was beginning. "You are not just a companion, Sophie." Alessandro whispered, his eyes searching hers. "You are a warrior." And then amidst the ruin of the room and the body of their enemy, the wolf kissed the maid. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was desperate, fueled by adrenaline and relief, and a sudden overpowering realization that he almost lost the only real thing he had found in years. Sophie froze for a second, then melted into him, her hands gripping his shirt. It was wrong. It was dangerous. But it felt like the only safe place in the world. When they pulled apart, breathless Alessandro rested his forehead against hers. "The Montgomerys made a mistake tonight," he said, his voice a low growl that vibrated through her chest. "They tried to kill my family. Now I am going to erase theirs." He stood up, pulling Sophie to her feet. "Stay with my mother. I have to finish this." As he walked to the door, he stopped and looked back. "When I come back, Sophie Bennett, we are going to have a very long conversation about your future, because you are never leaving this house again. The weeks following the siege on the De Luca estate were not characterized by the silence of peace, but by the deafening roar of a collapsing empire. Alessandro De Luca did not believe in half measures. When he declared war, he practiced a scorched earth policy that left his enemies with nowhere to hide. The cleanup was methodical and terrifyingly efficient. While the bullet holes in the manor's grey stone walls were patched by master masons, Alessandro's legal team and shadow brokers were dismantling the Montgomery legacy brick by brick. Silas Montgomery, the man who had authorized the hit on Alessandro's family, never even made it to a safe house. He was intercepted by federal agents 3 days after the attack, acting on an anonymous tip that included terabytes of encrypted data regarding his offshore laundering schemes. Alessandro watched the arrest on the news from his study, a glass of amber whiskey in his hand. Silas looked old, frail, and defeated as he was shoved into the back of a squad car. There would be no bail. There would be no deal. Alessandro had ensured that Silas would die in a concrete box, stripped of his fortune and his pride. But for Isabella, the woman who had brought this poison into his home, Alessandro had reserved a far more intimate psychological dismantling. He did not hand her over to the police immediately. For 7 days, Isabella sat in the holding cell beneath the estate. It was a cold, windowless room, usually reserved for traitors to the family code. She was given water and bread just enough to survive, but not enough to maintain the strength to scream. The isolation was absolute. No guards spoke to her. No light entered to mark the passing of time. She was left alone with the terrifying realization that her beauty, her money, and her last name held no power here. On the 8th day, the heavy steel door creaked open. Isabella scrambled into the corner, shielding her eyes from the sudden harsh light of the hallway. She looked like a spectre of her former self. Her once pristine Versace dress was torn and stained with the grime of the floor. Her blonde hair, usually a halo of perfect waves, was matted and dull. She smelled of fear and neglect. Alessandro stepped into the cell. He was impeccable in a charcoal suit, the very image of the control and power she had tried to manipulate. But he wasn't alone. Sophie walked in beside him. Isabella blinked her eyes, adjusting. She expected to see Sophie in a uniform, or perhaps looking fearful. Instead, Sophie looked radiant. She wore a tailored coat of cream cashmere, her hair falling in soft, healthy curls around her shoulders. She didn't look like a maid. She looked like the lady of the house. "You!" Isabella croaked, her voice raspy from disuse. She tried to stand, bracing herself against the damp wall, her vanity flaring up one last time. "You brought the help to watch me die, Alessandro." "Sophie is not the help," Alessandro said, his voice echoing off the stone walls with a finality that chilled the air. "She is the only reason you are still breathing." Alessandro stepped closer, the heels of his shoes clicking on the concrete. He didn't look at Isabella with anger anymore. He looked at her with the indifference one might show a dead insect. "My men wanted to put you in a hole in the woods," Alessandro said calmly. "They said it was the only fitting punishment for a woman who abuses the elderly. But Sophie stopped them." Isabella looked at Sophie, confusion warring with her hatred. "Why want the pleasure of doing it yourself?" Sophie stepped forward. She didn't flinch away from the woman who had tormented her. She looked at Isabella with a pity that cut deeper than any knife. "Because death is an escape," Sophie said softly. "And I didn't think you deserved to escape what you are. You deserve to feel what it's like to be powerless." Alessandro reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick manila envelope. He tossed it onto the dirty floor at Isabella's feet. "What is this?" Isabella whispered, staring at the packet. "Your new life," Alessandro answered. "As of this morning, Isabella Montgomery is legally dead. A tragic boating accident off the coast of Capri. No body was found, but the memorial service will be lovely. Your father believes it. The world believes it." Isabella's eyes went wide with horror. You can't do that." "I have already done it," Alessandro continued coldly. "Inside that envelope are your new papers, new name, new history. You are now a high school dropout from Ohio with a record of bad credit and no living relatives. You have 0 assets, no trust fund, no connections." "You're killing me," she sobbed, sliding down the wall. "No. I am giving you the life you mocked," Alessandro said. "My men will drive you to a city far from here, a place where the name De Luca means nothing. You will be dropped off with $200 in your pocket. You will work. You will scrub floors. You will serve people who are rude and ungrateful and cruel. You will experience every ounce of humiliation you inflicted on Sophie and my mother." He leaned down, his face inches from hers. "And if you ever speak the name De Luca, or try to contact the press, or even whisper about who you used to be, I will know. And the next time I come for you, I won't bring mercy. I will bring a shovel." Isabella looked up at him, trembling violently. She looked at Sophie, searching for a crack in the resolve, a hint of the timid girl she had bullied. But that girl was gone. In her place was a woman forged in fire. "Goodbye, Isabella," Sophie said, her voice steady. "I hope you learn how to clean up your own messes." Alessandro took Sophie's hand, and they turned their backs on the sobbing woman in the corner. As the heavy steel door slammed shut, sealing Isabella's fate, Sophie felt a weight lift from her soul. The ghost was gone. 6 months later, the harsh winter of Tuscany had finally broken, giving way to a spring that exploded in vibrant color. The De Luca estate, once a fortress of gloom and tension, had transformed. The windows were thrown open to let in the scent of jasmine and cypress. In the rose garden, Donatella sat in her wheelchair, a straw hat protecting her face from the warm sun. She was no longer the vacant, trembling shell of a woman. While the dementia had taken parts of her that would never return, the removal of the toxic sedatives Isabella had been feeding her had sparked a miraculous recovery. She was alert, her eyes bright with recognition and humor. "Too much water. Sophie, too much." Donatella scolded playfully, pointing a gloved finger at the watering can. "You will drown the roots." Sophie laughed, the sound ringing clear across the garden. "I'm sorry, Mamma De Luca. I'm still learning the gardening part. I'm better at the cleaning part." "No cleaning," Donatella wagged her finger. "Alessandro forbids it. You are to sit and eat grapes and read to me." Sophie smiled, putting the watering can down. She adjusted the blanket over Donatella's knees with a tenderness that came naturally. It had been a difficult transition. For the first few months, Sophie had struggled with her new position. She felt like an imposter waiting for someone to tell her to put her apron back on. But Alessandro had been patient. He had fired the judgmental staff, hired a new team who treated Sophie with respect, and spent every evening reminding her that she belonged there, not because of what she did, but because of who she was. "Sophie." The deep voice came from the stone patio. Sophie turned her heart, doing that familiar flutter it did every time she saw him. Alessandro was walking toward them. The darkness that used to cling to him, the aura of the ruthless wolf, had softened. He still commanded the room. He was still the most dangerous man in Italy. But around Sophie, the armor came off. He wore a crisp white linen shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing the tattoo on his forearm, and casual trousers. He stopped in front of her, ignoring the dirt on her hands, and took them in his own. "The meeting with the 5 families is over," he said, searching her face. "And," Sophie asked, feeling a spike of anxiety, "did they accept it? The changes. They had no choice." Alessandro smirked, a glimpse of his old arrogance surfacing. "They know that without you there would be no De Luca empire left to ally with. They know you saved the matriarch. You are more respected in the underworld right now than half the capos." Sophie let out a breath, her shoulders relaxing. "I don't need their respect. I just need to know we're safe." "We are safe," Alessandro promised. "The Montgomerys are a memory. The business is secure." He glanced at his mother, who was watching them with a wide, knowing grin. Donatella nodded at her son, a silent encouragement. Alessandro turned back to Sophie. His expression grew serious, his grey eyes shimmering with an emotion he rarely showed vulnerability. "Sophie, 6 months ago, I was a blind man, living in a golden cage. I thought I needed a merger. I thought I needed a strategic alliance to protect this family." He reached into his pocket. Sophie's breath hitched. "I realized that power doesn't come from contracts or bloodlines." Alessandro continued, his voice dropping to a husky whisper. "It comes from loyalty. It comes from the courage to stand in front of a monster with nothing but a lamp and a letter opener to protect someone you love." He didn't pull out a velvet box. Instead, he produced a ring that caught the sunlight in a dazzling display. It wasn't the gaudy, oversized rock he had given Isabella. It was an antique platinum band, set with a rare deep blue sapphire surrounded by diamonds. "This was my grandmother's," Alessandro said. "Not the one Isabella stole. The real one. The one she hid during the war. It has never been worn by anyone who wasn't a De Luca by blood or by soul." He dropped to one knee in the rich garden soil, ignoring the stain on his trousers. The security guards by the perimeter wall turned their backs out of respect, giving them privacy. "Sophie Bennett," Alessandro said, looking up at her. "You saved my mother. You saved my life. You saved my soul from turning into stone. I don't want a mistress of the house. I don't want a trophy. I want a partner. I want you." He took a deep breath. "Will you marry me? Will you rule this chaos with me?" Tears spilled over Sophie's cheeks, hot and fast. She looked at the ring, then at Donatella, who was clapping her hands and shouting, "Si, say yes, Bella." Sophie looked back down at the man who had once terrified her, the man who had become her world. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, 1,000 times. Yes." Alessandro slid the ring onto her finger. It fit as if it had been made for her hand alone. He stood up and pulled her into a crushing embrace, kissing her with a passion that felt like a promise sealed in fire. For the first time in her life, Sophie wasn't surviving. She was living through the twist, Karma's final course. 4,000 miles away, the sky was a dreary shade of grey over a truck-stop diner in New Jersey. The air inside smelled of stale, grease-burnt coffee and regret. "Hey, waitress, I've been waiting for my refill for 10 minutes. The shout came from table 4, a large man with grease stains on his shirt and a mean disposition. "I'm coming, sir." "I'm sorry," the waitress muttered, rushing over with the steaming pot. Her name tag read, Betty. But she didn't look like a Betty. She looked like a woman who had aged 10 years in 6 months. Her once smooth hands were chapped and red from bleach and dishwater. Her dyed brown hair was pulled back in a messy, practical bun. She poured the coffee her back, aching her feet, swollen in cheap orthopedic shoes. "Make it quick," the man grunted, not even looking at her. "And bring me some more sugar. This tastes like swill." "Yes, sir," she said, biting her tongue. The old instinct to snap back to scream, "Do you know who I am?" rose in her throat, but she swallowed it down like bile. She knew exactly who she was. She was nobody. She turned to walk back to the kitchen, but the sound of the television mounted above the counter made her freeze. The midday news program was airing a segment on international luxury. And in a stunning private ceremony in Tuscany today, billionaire shipping magnate Alessandro De Luca married his longtime companion, Sophie Bennett. Sources say the bride, a former humanitarian advocate, wore a custom lace gown that is rumored to be priceless. The camera zoomed in on the couple walking out of a cathedral. Sophie looked like a queen, regal and glowing, waving to a cheering crowd. Alessandro had his arm around her waist, looking at her with a devotion that transcended the screen. He looked happy. The waitress stared at the screen, her grip on the coffee pot tightening until her knuckles turned white. That was her life. That was her dress. That was her man. It was all supposed to be hers. "Hey, are you deaf?" the customer shouted, slamming his hand on the table, startling her. "I said, sugar. Move it." Isabella Montgomery tore her eyes away from the screen. She looked at the rude man, then down at the dirty rag tucked into her apron. A single hot tear rolled down her cheek, cutting through the layer of kitchen grease on her face. The realization hit her like a physical blow. This wasn't a nightmare she would wake up from. This was her forever. "Yes, sir," she whispered, her voice broken and hollow. "Right away, sir." She turned and limped back toward the kitchen, the sound of the wedding bells from the television fading into the clatter of dirty dishes, trapped in the hell she had built for herself, while the maid she had tormented reigned as a queen. Wow, what a journey. From a terrified maid scrubbing floors in fear to the queen of the Mafia empire. Sophie proved that true power isn't about money, a fancy last name, or stepping on others. It's about loyalty, courage, and having a good heart when it matters most. And Isabella. Well, let's just say karma doesn't miss. She learned the absolute hardest way that when you treat people like dirt, you might just end up living in it. What did you think of Alessandro's decision? Did Isabella deserve a second chance, or was her punishment of a life of servitude the perfect justice? I want to know your thoughts. I read every single comment. If you enjoyed this story and want more dramatic romances with crazy twists and satisfying endings, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss the next episode. Until next time, keep watching.